So, are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
So the first question is, was Abigail wrong to insult her husband behind his back? That's a question that I asked.
Wow. Interesting. Great question. I kind of have, I don't have a clear-cut answer for that. It's yes and no. I think on one hand, obviously, we don't want to be insulting. Obviously, that is from that perspective.
She did call him an idiot.
Yes, I know. And the thing is, that's part of, in the story, we understand that's part of his character, is that he's gone and like, let's realize what he's done. He's basically, and pretty much knowingly, because of his foolishness or his stupidity, as our translation renders it, did invite a guy with like armed men to come and probably exact vengeance. And in the ancient Near East, it's not crazy to think that if you're going to treat someone who's got soldiers like that, they're going to come and kill you. So it's kind of like, it's a major bonehead move. And yeah, acknowledging that, I know there's a gray area there. I think in scripture for that. It's a tension.
So it's a case by case.
Well, because I don't think her heart intent is to malign her husband, really. It's just honestly acknowledge that this guy has done something that is, like, unbelievably, yes, stupid, foolish. Like, you don't do things like that. And David, this is who he is. Like, that's who he is, this guy. Please don't take it personally, Like, that's kind of, the heart intent is trying to save her family, not malign her husband.
She is kind of protecting him in that moment, even though.
Yeah, and David, in the end, you can read to the end of the story, which I encourage people to do. David doesn't end up doing anything to these guys, and God takes care of them.
All right, the next question is, are moments of anger and inflammation unavoidable? What can we do to prepare and avoid even being in this position in the first place?
I think the inflammation part that we talk about, that's kind of like letting those emotions come to fruition. I do believe that is definitely avoidable. I think a big thing that can kind of help us when we go to God is understanding His grace towards us, His love towards us, and having the relationship with God be kind of the biggest thing that we see in our lives and in our day, magnifying God. Because we often get upset and angry over circumstances and other people. And the greater that God is in our vision and the good things that He's done for us, these things that don't go our way become smaller. And that's what I meant, like, that's a change of circumstance. That means when things go wrong that maybe usually would get us angry, we no longer get quite so angry because we're still filled with a lot of grace and thankfulness and gratitude. And we can see that God is really bigger, and things really are bigger than the little circumstances that we bust open. There are other types of anger where we might be angry at injustice and things that are offensive to God. That, though, again, there's a way of handling that doesn't lead to some impulsive, emotionally driven behavior that is destructive. That always is bad and is avoidable.
So how do we prepare to minimize the incidences of these moments?
I always think like a daily devotional, like what I was reading in that Thomas à Kempis quote, or kind of the point is that every day we need to start kind of fresh. So that evokes this idea of going to God in devotional practice, like prayer and just Bible reading. I would say in the morning, prepare yourself for the day. And I always say this to everyone else in the discipleship groups and stuff. You get ready, you eat, you brush your teeth, you comb your hair. Ladies, you put on makeup. You prepare yourself for the day. Prepare our hearts, minds, and souls as well by going to God every morning.
So some soul care.
Some soul care, yes.
All right. The next question is, when there is no Abigail to point us to what's right, what advice do you have for someone that is inflamed or about to do something that they'll regret? So I guess in the moment, not the prep work ahead of time, but in that moment where you're about to or in the middle of it, what advice would you have?
I think if you've been doing the first thing, if you've been going to God and you've been learning about His expectation on our life and going like having daily devotion in the morning and stuff, very quickly you understand what is right and wrong in your behavior. You are convicted. And in moments where you may be emotionally driven, you also at the back of your head also kind of know, like, what I'm doing now isn't the right thing to do. And if you get that, when you get that sense, you need to kind of put on the brakes. You stop what you're doing and then go in prayer to God, even like just saying, I'm really upset right now. I can't help it. God, this is what's going on. And being just very real and honest to God. even if you don't feel like it, force it, and then just sit quietly and just exercise some self-control. But definitely go to God in prayer and repeatedly go to Him instead of acting out. It's kind of the quick answer I have for it, because I know we don't have too much time. But if those are things, if that is something that you particularly struggle with, you can definitely let me know afterwards. We can sit and talk about it in more specific ways. Obviously, everyone handles things a little bit differently, experiences things a little bit differently. And I'll definitely be happy to shed some light from my experience that we help you out too.
All right, well, the last question is more of an open-ended question, so I guess you can go in different directions. But this person is asking, do you have any scripture passages that you would recommend concerning pride? So just some other readings, because you mentioned pride at the end as being one of the sources of why this even happens to begin with when we get ensnared in sin. So are there just other readings like that would shed some more light and insight on?
I was thinking the proverb of, like, falling pride goes before the fall. I definitely think that reading through, I don't have a passage offhand that I think of too much, but I think certain parts of Scripture really kind of bring that out. I particularly think of, the Beatitudes, where Jesus goes, and it's in Matthew 5. And if you look at those values and those virtues that Jesus brings out, like, this is his teaching to the church. And like, okay, I see this is what is expected of me. He goes full measure, and it's a really hard thing to face, but we see the hard attitudes in there, and it's like, there's room for pride. Meek and lowly. And then I think if you just were to read through one of the Gospels, like Matthew, Mark, or Luke, particularly, just look at the disciples, like the guys who you would think should have the greatest pride in their spiritual, like, hey, I'm taught, number 3 guy under Jesus. That's a pretty cool thing, and the Gospels are always really clear just how miserable they fail all the time. And like, you just kind of look repeatedly, like, oh my God, why are you messing up so much? And I think that speaks a bit to pride in our own hearts. Like, if Peter, if John and James were constantly being like corrected, scolded by Jesus because they just couldn't seem to get it right, or in fact when he needed them the most, they like bailed and like denied they knew him. How much pride should we have 2,000 years trying to catch up?
I guess I would have a follow-up question then. How would you cultivate humility? So we know, like, we have all the stories, like, morally of, like, the wrongness of pride. All the stories to back it up in the Bible. But what are some ways that we can cultivate that humility in a moment? Like, humble ourselves before God does it.
That can be a scary thing, right? When God decides to need a good dose of humility, he's got to inject that the hard way. Yeah. Well, I think for me, I would say part of that is really acknowledging. I've said this before. As much as we often come because we're hurt, and we're broken, and we're victims of someone else's mistreatment, there's the flip side where we also have done that to someone else. That we know that the ways in which we disobey God in our lives has been hurtful to other people. We are someone's bad guy. And acknowledging that truth, the depth of that truth, the ugliness of that truth. It's hard for us to do because no one likes to be that person, but we are. And when we admit those sorts of things and acknowledge that stuff about ourselves, I think it puts us in a position, in a picture where we don't feel quite so proud anymore, and we realize that really, if I don't want to be this person who I can be at my ugliest, I need someone's help, and I need God's help. And I would say going to that truth on a regular basis brings us back down to earth. So I think if we don't acknowledge that truth about ourselves, we are kind of living in like la la land. We want to be grounded in the reality of who we are, and only then can we have the humble spirit to reach out and rely on God for his guidance and transformation in our hearts.
So like flipping it and changing our perspective.
Yeah.
Or rather asking God to change our perspective so that we see ourselves as the ones actually in need of grace, and how we perpetuate hurt to others as much as we experience hurt ourselves. And that kind of helps. Is that kind of what you said? That's kind of what I got.
That's exactly the way I would have wanted to say it. Thank you.